There's an interesting lesson from video games that I think we can apply to life, and it's basically the difference between tempo and value. So the idea is tempo is about playing for the greatest advantage you can get right now, even if it means that long term you might produce less overall value. Whereas value might be playing for a longer term advantage, right? Like investing in the future, but potentially being weaker now. And it's generally important to understand these two values because if you play too much towards long term value and your opponent plays more towards tempo, they will win earlier on before you're able to ramp up and get towards the end game value. On the other hand, if you play too much for tempo and your opponent is able to play just a little bit slower than you, so they match your tempo for the most part, they keep up, they might be a little bit behind, but then the value kicks in and they're able to pull out ahead. So in life, I think there are a couple of lessons from this. One of them is, of course, that it's okay to sacrifice some progress now to get more later, right? An example could just be investing long term, where you're not using that money on anything, but it grows over time and then you can spend it later. On the other hand, I think many of us spend too long waiting to try to make the perfect decision or waiting for the right opportunity. So we're kind of playing the value game. We're holding our resources, waiting for a good chance to deploy them. Whereas the people who just deploy their resources immediately get immediate benefits. Either the thing works and they benefit, or they benefit because the thing didn't work, but they get a feedback loop, they learn something immediately, and then they get to try again. And so someone who's waiting to deploy their resources might be waiting 5, 10 years, whereas someone who deploys them immediately might get to explore 10 or 20 opportunities in the same time that this other person's waiting. So I think for many of us, we would benefit from leaning into tempo in our lives more, simply because the way life tends to work is the more action you take, the more you get rewarded, either in results or learning, both of which are valuable. Whereas waiting and waiting tends to just delay the exact same outcome for the most part, right? And often we learn the most when we do. Like you could read 10 books about something, but then you like, say you read 10 books about sales, but then you do your first like 10 sales calls and you learn more in those 10 sales calls practically than those 10 sales books could have taught you. So it's just interesting to think about, why do we choose to delay? And I think a lot of it is a fear of failure and a fear of uncertainty in a sense. Like as long as we don't start, there's no risk. But once we start, there's the risk of failure, there's the risk of all sorts of outcomes that we don't know. There's the risk of disappointment. But I think that's far better than the risk of mediocrity from just wasting away doing nothing for a very long time. So yeah, my recommendation is just start, see what happens, and you'll find that everything else in life also falls together and progresses much quicker when you start taking action towards your goals.